During the Napoleonic Wars, the British seized the Dutch colony in South Africa. The Boers, the descendants of the Dutch colonists, lived under British rule until 1835, when, inspired by the ban on slavery, wars and a lack of land, they embarked on the Great Trek to find new land. The British annexed their first republic, Natalia, in 1843, so the Boers formed two new republics, the Orange Free State and Transvaal, also known as the South African Republic.
South Africa looks back on her glorious past. Just about 100 years ago, teams of grunting oxen heaved wagons over bare rocks and scrub, as thousands of Boer farmers, descendants of the original Dutch settlers, left Cape Colony to open up the interior. They called themselves the Voortrekkers. They founded the Transvaal. And today, at a mighty hillside camp south of Pretoria, the modern Union remembers the Voortrekkers. They wear the old costumes, and then as an additional celebration, 37 couples join in a mass wedding. And by the way, none of the girls are allowed to use lipstick, rouge or powder, just to show the world that beauty is more than skin deep in South Africa.
Although initially uninterested in the region, the discovery of diamonds pricked the British interest, especially after the global financial panic of 1873. In 1877, the British proposed annexing the republics, and the Boers, who were nearing bankruptcy and fearful of the Zulus, finally agreed. However, just 2 years later, the British crushed the Zulus, and this freed the Boers to voice their disapproval of the annexation. In late 1880, 10,000 Boers gathered under the leadership of Paul Kruger and declared their independence. The British responded quickly and sent troops north, but they were ambushed at Bronkhorstspruit. Throughout January and February of 1881, the British continued to attack the Boers, but in the battles of Lane's Neck and Majuba Hill, the skilled marksmen and the Boer commandos beat them back. So peace was made in March and the Boer states had their independence guaranteed. Ended just before the scramble for Africa began. European powers began rapidly colonizing Africa. Notably, the Germans took southwest Africa, and this threatened British Cape. Then gold was discovered near modern-day Johannesburg, and the economy of Transvaal improved so much that it threatened the dominance of the Cape Colony. So the British, particularly Cecil Rhodes, once again looked to annex the Boer republics. Meanwhile, thousands of foreigners had migrated to Transvaal during the gold rush. These Uitlanders lacked a lot of rights and discontent in their community was high. So, in late 1895, Cecil Rhodes organised a raid, the Jameson Raid, into Transvaal, hoping to encourage an Uitlander rebellion. However, it failed, and this only convinced the Boer states to import arms from Europe. Also, interestingly, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany sent a telegram to Kruger congratulating the Boers, which, in the build-up to World War I, worsened Anglo-German relations. Finally, in September 1899, with tension still high, Transvaal sent an ultimatum demanding the build-up of British troops withdrew from their border, but it was ignored and war was declared in October. In the early months of the war, the Boers and the foreign volunteers in their ranks were able to take advantage of the unprepared British and lay siege to Mafeking, Ladysmith and Kimberley. But in January, hundreds of thousands of British reinforcements arrived in South Africa and advanced to relieve the besieged cities. Their advance was only temporarily halted at the Battle of Sepong Kop, a battle which Mahatma Gandhi and Winston Churchill both witnessed. However, the now numerically superior British continued their advance. By February they had relieved both Ladysmith and Kimberley, and the following month they took Bloemfontein, the capital of the Orange Free State. In May, Robert Baden-Powell, founder of the Scouts movement, had relieved Mafeking, and in June both Johannesburg and Pretoria were captured. The war seemed over. In Britain, the victorious Prime Minister Salisbury was re-elected and they declared the South African Republic, taking away the official title of Transvaal. However, many Boers, led by the likes of De la Rey, Jan Smuts and Louis Botha, launched a guerrilla war. Once again, the Boers had some initial success, but the British Army, under the leadership of Herbert Kitchener, responded brutally. They adopted a scorched earth policy to crush the guerrillas. This included torching crops and houses and putting Boer civilians into concentration camps. The guerrilla war went on until 1902, but the Boers finally gave up, and the annexation of the states was made final.
Modern South Africa. Serene, lush, varied, home to almost 50 million people. A tourist center, a prosperous state, rich with a mixed heritage of British, Dutch, and African. Peaceful. It was not always so. Between October 1899 and May 1902, the Second Boer War ravaged the southern tip of Africa, a conflict resulting from the Boers' intense nationalism and xenophobia and British greed. The war eventually resulted in a brutal mixture of concentration camps and scorched earth employed by the British, killing thousands of Boers. Even when the British were victorious, the decimated Boer population remained hostile to their English overlords. This situation led to mild British segregation when the Afrikaners, the descendants of the Boers, took control of the South African government. Tensions between British and Boer had been escalating for a century. The Dutch had settled the Cape of Good Hope since 1652, and their colony, Cape Colony, was mainly agricultural, the people nomadic. But in 1815, during the Napoleonic Wars, the British defeated Dutch South African colonists at the Battle of Blouberg, gaining control of the colony. Needless to say, the Boers resented British rule. In vast migrations beginning in the 1830s and 1840s, known as the Great Trek, the Boers began heading eastward up the Atlantic coast, and on October 12, 1839, the Natalia Republic was established. Only 3.5 years later, on May 12, 1843, the British conquered and annexed Natalia as part of their empire. The Boers then resumed their exodus, this time heading to interior South Africa. In the early 1850s, they formed the Transvaal Republic and the Orange Free State, but in 1877, Britain had absorbed Transvaal as part of their empire. While the Orange Free State would remain on friendly terms with England until the Second Boer War, Transvaal despised English sovereignty. Tensions between Transvaal and the British escalated as Boer nationalism ran rampant, desperate for freedom, and in December 1880, Transvaal declared independence. By December 16th, fighting had begun, and on December 20th, the first major battle of the First Boer War began at Bronkhorstspruit. Although called a war, the conflict was only 10 weeks of sporadic fighting. The Boers' unconventional military tactics, such as guerrilla warfare, proved extremely effective in the South African terrain, resulting in a Boer victory and 408 British losses. Only 41 Boers were killed. On March 6, 1881, a peace treaty written in the previous weeks at the Pretoria Convention was signed, and Transvaal became a completely independent Boer republic. In 1886, gold was discovered in Transvaal. This prompted an influx of prospectors to the Republic from far and wide, including British. The immigrants came so quickly that the city of Johannesburg grew to a population of 50,000 almost literally overnight. The Boers' longtime dislike of the British caused the Boers to enact a series of discriminatory laws. These included limiting voting rights, levying taxes designed against the British, and tightening administrative requirements. These oppressive measures soon escalated into the failed 1895 Jameson Raid. Backed by the Cape Colony Prime Minister Cecil Rhodes, the conspirators planned for the British under Boer rule to revolt and then be backed up by the Cape Colony troops. This force then would overthrow the Transvaal president, Paul Kruger. The uprising was a fiasco. Early on, the British troops encountered resistance, losing several men, and were eventually surrounded and outnumbered by Boer artillery. Seeing their hopeless position, Commander Leander Starr Jameson, for whom this raid was named, surrendered. This would only serve to increase British and Boer uneasiness and led to an alliance between Transvaal and the Free Orange State. Following the Jameson Raid, a series of diplomatic talks between the British colonies and Boer republics began, the British still hoping to gain control of the Boer territory. The talks eventually broke down, and a buildup of British troops commenced on the Transvaal border. President Paul Kruger called for the British to leave, giving the troops 48 hours. The British refused to do so, and on the 11th of October, 1899, Transvaal, allied with the Free Orange State, declared war on the British Empire. The Boers immediately began an offensive attack besieging the British garrisons of Ladysmith, Mafeking, and Kimberley. When a British counteroffensive was launched to relieve the cities, the Boers beat them back with a series of tactical victories at Colenso, Magersfontein, and Spienkop. The Boers, however, were not able to conquer the cities, Ladysmith holding out for 118 days, Mafeking an astonishing 217. By early 1900, the British had reinforced their troops, now commanded by Lord Roberts, and began forcing the Boers back into the republics. By February 1900, Natal and Cape Colony were secure, and the British began an offensive on the Boers. On the 13th of March, the Orange Free State capital Bloemfontein was captured, and on June 5th, Pretoria, the Transvaal capital, followed. On June 11th to 12th, the last major formal battle of the Second Boer War was fought at Diamond Hill. While the British beat back the Boer troops, more casualties were inflicted on the British, with 150 men dead. In the third and final portion of the Second Boer War, lasting from September 1900 to May 1902, the Boers switched to the unconventional war tactics that had won them the First Boer War. Once again, the British armies were mauled by guerrilla warfare, at one point causing 1,500 British casualties in 10 days. British forces had also been weakened when Lord Roberts incorrectly assumed the war would end with the capture of the Boer capitals and removed most of the British troops from duty. Besides surprise attacks on enemy troops, Boers also conducted a series of raids against the British infrastructure, resources, and supply spots. All were aimed at limiting the power and capacity of the British Empire in South Africa. To combat the new Boer tactics, the British adopted an even more brutal form of warfare. With a policy of scorched earth, the British burned Boer farms and Boer homes, eventually destroying 30,000 homes and killing over 1 million sheep, cows, and other domestic animals. Boer wells were poisoned. Perhaps worst of all, Boer women and children and captured native Africans were rounded up in concentration camps where they lived under brutal conditions. This would be the first instance in history where concentration camps were used on a wide scale. Concentration camp life was vile. Boer women and children received meager rations, the relatives of Boers still fighting receiving less than those who were not. Africans were expected to grow their own food. Sanitation was also poor in these camps. Measles, typhoid, and dysentery ran rampant. At its peak, the annual death rate was 6.9%. Overall, 27,927 Boers died, of whom 22,074 were children under 16. An unknown number of Africans were interned, but death estimates range from 14,000 to 20,000. Between the British's destructive warfare strategy and their concentration camp policy, the world was appalled. To some, the entire concentration camp system was nothing less than genocide. Emily Hobhouse was the main champion for improving the camp conditions. She was called a troublemaker and a Boer sympathizer, but her efforts succeeded in dropping the death rate to 2%. Radical Parliament members, such as David Lloyd George and John Ellis, raised the matter in Parliament, wondering, when does a war stop being a war? But they were challenged by the Conservative Secretary of War, St. John Brodrick. Brodrick originally claimed the camps were clean and comfortable, but had no evidence to back up his statement. The Fawcett Commission was formed to investigate the matter, which quickly confirmed Hobhouse's complaint about the camps. The The creator of this controversial form of warfare was also debated, and Lord Robert Kitchener, who had become commander of the British troops on November 20th, 1900, was questioned. Kitchener argued that the concentration camps were not a deliberately genocidal policy, rather they were the result of disastrous lack of foresight and rank incompetence on part of the military. However, during the conflict, military officials rated the life of the prisoners abysmally low in priority. Finally, the bloody, destructive British tactics began to wear away the Boers. In May 31st, 1902, the Second Boer War came to an end with the signing of the Treaty of Vereeniging. The treaty stated that both sides were to disarm the troops, that all Boers would swear allegiance to the Crown, that Transvaal and Free Orange State would be absorbed into the British Empire, forming the South African Union, but would eventually be given self-government, which was granted in 1906 to Transvaal and in 1907 to Free Orange State, and that £3 million would be granted in reconstruction aid to the Boers, among other requests and pledges. The British policies would cast long shadows on both the South African region and England herself for decades. The Second Boer War had been the most costly and deadly war Britain had fought since 1815, with 21,114 British soldiers dead. The Boers' agrarian economy, culture, lifestyle, national identity, and population was all but destroyed. And finally, between the Boers' guerrilla warfare and the British use of concentration camps, the Second Boer War provided a chilling presentation of what war would become during the 20th century.
The Boers did receive limited self-governance a few years later, and then, in 1910, the Union of South Africa was declared. Although it was a British Dominion, Boer leaders such as Botha and Smuts served as Prime Minister. The guerrilla war, failure of cavalry and the likes helped modernise warfare, and better prepared the British for World War I. The war also worried the British enough to bring them out of their diplomatic isolation, and they signed an alliance with Japan. Plus, because so many poor people in Britain were unfit for military service, the British introduced social reforms, and this marked the beginning of the welfare state.
The Kruger House Museum is a frequently visited heritage site comprising the original Kruger House built in 1883, two exhibition halls, namely the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek Hall and Exile Hall, and President Kruger's railway coach. The house is the original home of legendary South African statesman Paul Kruger, elected president of the then Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek in 1883. He devoted his life to the freedom of his people and the independence of the Republic. This was one of the first homes in Tshwane with electric light and was also equipped with a telephone. Beautifully showcased is a model of the Dutch light armoured deck ship HMS de Gelderland, sent by Queen Wilhelmina from the Netherlands to facilitate Kruger's exile. Not to be missed is Kruger's stately railway carriage in which he travelled around the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek.
Boekenhoutsfontein was the farm of Paul Kruger, Boer resistance leader and president of the Transvaal Republic. The farm is located in Rustenburg and has been turned into a museum in honor of the Afrikaner leader. On the grounds is a cottage of 1841, the then Transvaal's oldest pioneer house called the Bronkhorst House. Next to the small house you will find the main house, today the Paul Kruger Country Museum, where Kruger lived with his 16 children and his second wife Gesina. The construction of the house started in 1872, and it offers a fascinating insight into Kruger's life in a time when South Africa was locked in a struggle for sovereignty with the British Empire. Next to the main house stands Paul Kruger's first house, the Hartebees House. This house is also currently being turned into a museum. Inside, a variety of tools are displayed, including the machine they used to manufacture candles. Kruger's main house was declared a national monument in 1936. It is now administrated by Kida Country Hotel, Conference Centre and Spa, and has been restored to its former glory. Kida Country House also boasts with an incredible collection of valuable historical objects, mostly from the Anglo-Boer War and other remarkable memorabilia. The hotel gives tribute to the men that fought in the bloodiest war ever to occur on South African soil, the Second Anglo-Boer War. Cecil John Rhodes sits proudly in the gardens of Kido Hotel, as well as Paul Kruger, smoking his famous pipe. Renowned sculptor Mr. Adam Madebe created these two life-size statues. In his last message to General Louis Botha, President Kruger said, "Seek in the past all that is good and beautiful. Make it your ideal and make it come true in the future."
Good afternoon, all my pipe smoking friends and community. Welcome back today again from another delivery from my smoking lounge, my stoep. After a very busy Friday where we had the opening of our provincial parliament, it is now very nice to just sit back and relax and think back about the successful event. Very festive event, but with all the dignitaries and politicians, it's nice now to be back on my stoep. Also a very hot and humid day. You might see some perspiration, but yeah, it's very nice. I enjoy it here on my stoep today. Today I want to bring back a topic that I found very intriguing this week, and that is the Oom Paul shape. Around about Tuesday or Wednesday, I was wondering how did it come that an old South African Boer Republic president became famous for a pipe shape. So I searched around and did some research and Googled, and it was actually very interesting. Unfortunately, I also found a few blogs and posts and YouTube videos that was not that friendly in terms of who he was and why the pipe name, the shape got his name. One guy actually said that since you know now who he is and what he did, you should actually not call it the pipe shape, the Oom Paul, but the Hungarian. Just to bring maybe a little bit perspective. By the way, all the posts that I read was from non-South Africans, so obviously we can't. They don't know all the history maybe, or they didn't read up everything about him, which is understandable. I will definitely not know enough about Washington Jefferson as I would know about Mandela and Paul Kruger and all those. But yeah, just to be fair, maybe is that he was no more bad than anyone else. He was accused of being a racist and supporting slavery and all that. Apartheid came 50 years later than him, so he was nothing different than Lord Kitchener and Cecil John Rhodes and everybody from his time. And if slavery is an issue, then Jefferson and Washington had slaves, and the American people took Kenyans into slavery. The point is, you can't take out the man from the time that he lived in. So in his time, he was actually a very respected politician and traveled all over the world gaining support for the for the campaign against the Anglo-Boer War and colonialism. But that's politics and history. Just to give a little bit perspective, he was very respected and not that bad person, giving the time that we speak about. Obviously today you look back and you think silly, but yeah. But back to the shape. Maybe the same as the person, you either love it or you hate it. I'm one of those who love it. To me, the Oom Paul shape is absolutely fantastic. It just it just hangs from your mouth. It's a good cleanser, and it smokes just wonderful. So to me, it's actually very nice. So why did it get this name? It looks like Wimpole, and there's also a statue that somewhere in Northwest where he's reading from a book, standing like this. So he was known to have a bent, full bent pipe like this, where you know it's kind of a close to a 90-degree type of thing, and you know the stem is way above the top of the bowl. Usually also a large pipe, and known to be apparently a good pipe. So it is where the name comes from, and yeah, it's I've got two of them. This is my other one. It's a Savinelli, also a bent, you know, also a Paul Kruger, Wimpole. And as I said, to me, they smoke really nice. They kind of hang freely from your mouth. And an added benefit is you can actually see how your tobacco is burning, whether it's a nice round burn and things like that. So that is also quite nice. And also it is assumed, maybe, or I think people is under the impression that if you smoke a Wimpole, you are an eccentric person. There's also a society, the Wimpole Society. So yeah, it is it takes a kind of a, as I say, you either love it or you hate it, and I'm luckily one of those who love it. That is my GBD, and if you want to know more about the man, there's a very good link on my post on my website to the SA history and the Anglo-Boer War website, which tells you a lot about the time and the Cecil John Rhodes and the prospects on gold, which gives you a good background. And apparently Daniel, understandably, because Paul Kruger gave the English a little bit of a hard time, Daniel doesn't want to call their shape the Wimpole, they call it the Hungarian. That's fine. But for most others, they are a true Wimpole shape. So with that then, just sharing my Wimpole experience with you. I'm going to greet you and invite you to come back and join my channel, subscribe, and yes, watch my videos. I hope you enjoyed it, and smoke on and enjoy your smoke. I'm going to sit back and enjoy the fresh breeze that's coming on this Friday afternoon. Thanks again for watching, and see you later. Bye bye.